Good morning, everybody. We are live for NFL week number 12. A very happy Thanksgiving to everybody watching from the United States, tuning in. Looking forward to talking everything in week 12. Within this video, if you're joining after, we'll talk about every game, every side, every total. We'll try to give you some prop looks as well. If you're joining after the stream has concluded as well, down in the description of the podcast, there'll be timestamps for every game. So if you're watching this, maybe on a busy Thursday, Thanksgiving morning, you're into Friday or Saturday or the weekend, you can drop down to the description below. You'll be able to see all the games. You'll be able to see all the times, and you can jump around to see what fits you to maybe get you that piece of information that gets you over the edge in terms of making a wager. Lots of familiar faces in the chat already. And the Chiefs slander. My goodness, I wasn't expecting that. The live chat is coming in pretty hot. So it is a Thanksgiving Wednesday episode. We'll keep it a little more casual because I know a lot of you are traveling or getting ready for the weekend. We have no planned releases tomorrow. We got a lot going on today. So it's kind of a couple days break. I'm also taking 2 days away from the podcast. So we'll wrap everything up here on the live stream, get you set for a fun NFL week ahead with a lot of games tomorrow, the Friday game as a new addition, and then a busy card on Sunday as well. Do I want to get into the Chiefs stuff now or not? I'm going to wait. We'll do the Chiefs stuff when we get to the Raiders game because there's kind of a middle section of games on Sunday that are a little lackluster, but I have a lot to say about the Chiefs. So keep those questions coming, as always, in the live chat as we go if you want to get anything out in front as well. I neglected Survivor talk a little bit more than I should have last week. There's two very good Survivor options. People are debating between this week and Tennessee and New England. I will address those in those games as we go. As rotation-wise, they're right next to each other. So I'll give you the pros and cons for that as well. And Joe Spano, I see your question about the teasers too. We will get into that as well. Adam Orphan, I want to wish Adam and everybody here a very happy Thanksgiving. Can't make the live show today as we have a noon tea time with the brothers in town. He's living well in Arizona with the year-round golf, which I'm getting into as well. The FootJoy shipment just showed up with some winter golf thermals, so I'm getting used to that too, but he has the benefit of being able to golf every day in the sun down in Arizona, so that's great. A noon tea time with friends and family on the Thanksgiving long weekend. Lots of good folks and questions coming in as well. So we'll start off where we always do, and let's get into some high and lows within the market ratings, which are taking some fun shape. So let me know in the chat, as always, who do you see here that's maybe too high? Who do you see that is maybe too low? We've had a couple adjustments. So Denver has been the team that I have kind of been circling as being too low, and specifically on the defensive side of things. And now we're looking at them currently sitting at 15th. So this is a big bump up. Last week, they were significantly lower. They were in like the mid-20s, and their defense was in the mid-20s as well, 23-24. They are now bumped up to 17th. I still think that that can creep up a little bit further, and I do think that we'll see them finish the season kind of in that 10 to 12 range. So when we're looking at the Chargers right now, 1.6 points better than an average team. Denver, 1.5 points worse. So I do think there's still some wiggle room for that Broncos price to continue ticking up a little bit as they become an above average team. But the one team that I kind of want to circle and call out a little bit is all the way down here at 30. The Chicago Bears, 5.1 points worse than an average NFL team based on closing lines and market ratings. We're looking at their offense at 22nd and their defense at 30th. And that defense at 30th is something that I don't think necessarily reflects the talent of defensive players that they have on the team right now, nor the way that they're playing. This is a unit that is improving week after week, and this is a team, despite being 5 points worse in market ratings than an average football team, that really had Detroit, who's all the way up at 8 with their backs against the wall, squandered that late. That defense ran out of gas with those games in Detroit. We'll talk about why in just a second, but I do think the Bears at 30th, I look at that Chicago team, I'm just not putting them with Justin Fields back in the same category as the Jets and the Panthers and the Giants. I think this can be a Bears team that probably works its way up into this 21, 22, 23 range alongside the Buccaneers, the Vikings, and the Cincinnati Bengals with Jake Browning going forward. So I thought that that was an interesting look seeing the Bears all the way down at 30 this week. In terms of the too high, boy, you look at Dallas. This is the absolute peak, I think, for the Cowboys and what we're going to see market rating wise. This is really high, a new high for the Cowboys, 6.1 points better than an average team. That's an awfully big number for Dallas, up too high. Let's look in the comments here, see what everybody is looking at. Connor says Detroit is too high. Certainly was an interesting look for them against the Bears last week at 8. I mean, they're absolutely no question above average. I think you have to absolutely put them within the top 12 as well. I think you have to put them top 10. 8 seems right to me, is how I would look at that. I think that that's kind of fair. So I would be curious, Connor, if you're saying they're too high, how low would you put them? Where do they belong within the ratings? James says New Orleans is too high. They're sitting at 12th. I could see that, especially with some of the injuries they've now suffered. Marshawn Lattimore going to miss time. Michael Thomas going to miss time. Garrett says the Chargers are too high at 10. That is a team that is going through a lot right now, especially with that coaching staff, for sure. Connor says Pittsburgh is too high. Interesting Steelers changes with the OC switch. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Some interesting player call-outs at the press conference today that we saw too. The Dooney says Baltimore too high and LAC too high after losing to Green Bay. Interesting call-out there. Ryan says the Jags are too high. They're currently sitting at 9th. They've kind of been there consistently all season long. So that is interesting too. Jim says Houston is too high at 13. Interesting. James Davis in agreement with me. Bears too low, pardon me. Connor says Baltimore too low. Have them as number 2, couple spots bigger. Murray says LAC too high. Chargers too high from James Davis. A lot of Chargers too high sentiment within the chat. Interesting one here. Nicholas Decker says the Raiders are too low. They're currently sitting at 27th within the ratings, up from 29 last week as they remain competitive against the Miami Dolphins on the road. So interesting look at market ratings. Again, I would still say Broncos have a little bit of room to increase. We could see the Bears defensively increase as well. And then I think when you're looking at it, Cowboys are at the absolute peak. Not necessarily saying that, hey, this is the spot where you're blindly fading the Cowboys. We'll talk about that game in a minute. But just from how it stands out, 4th for Dallas. Really, I don't know if they can comfortably make the push into the top 3 and sort of sit there and maintain that for the rest of the season. Michael Berkowitz says, love the hoodie vibe today, Adam. Very casual. As always, Lululemon keeping me as spry as possible on the video stream. So, yeah, kept it easy. Again, it's kind of a weird day outside. A lot warmer than usual as well. So that's keeping it nice and easy. Mike Stack says, Adam, I thought you lived in Canada and moved to the USA. Did you move back? Thought you were in California. Wanted to get into California full time and be in Southern California, but visa-wise, just not happening. It's one of the more difficult things to do as a Canadian to move to the United States. I don't know if there's a country that is more difficult to move into. If you're a Canadian citizen, we get 6.5 months there a year where we can just be there without any problem. But in order to move there full time, it's next to impossible to do. There's a giant lottery system and it's just an absolute mess. So I'm just outside of Vancouver now, Pacific Northwest, about 15 minutes north of Bellingham in Washington. So that kind of gives you an area to where I am now. But yeah, that's kind of the situation with that as well. Murray, definitely not Mexican. That's I see where you're going with that. Slow to move on that as well. All right, let's get into it. As we pull up the board, we'll get through each game. We'll talk every side. We'll talk every total. We'll give some prop looks, and there's actually some interesting ones to consider. And I'll include a couple in-game looks. And please keep me honest as we go here, as we get everybody on the right page with Survivor. I know I missed some of those comments last week, but I'll be sure to get all of those right as we go through it. Game number 1 kicks off bright and early tomorrow, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. Green Bay Packers on the road at the Detroit Lions. Lions 7.5-point favorites with a market high of 8 at BetOnline. Total currently 47. And this total has been bouncing around a little bit. It was as high as 48, but we got news yesterday, both Aaron Jones out of the backfield and Luke Musgrave, the standout tight end for Green Bay, listed as doubtful. When you see a doubtful tag on a player, the day before they're scheduled to play the game, that means 95% of the time they're going to miss that game. Essentially, you get the doubtful tag. That means you're out. This is based on injury reports the last 3 years. So you can expect the Packers to be without Jones and without Musgraves for this game against Detroit. That has impacted the Packers offense and brought this total down a little bit because those are obviously two huge key weapons within how the Packers offensive scheme runs. My initial thought within this was looking to the over because these Lions games in Detroit just are really kind of taking on a similar feel to what the Bears games late last year took on, where it's just the game opens up and it doesn't stop. And there's just something about this environment within Detroit that is just conducive to a lot of points in these games getting crazy towards the end. And so I think Lions overs are going to be really popular, especially with early week bettors the rest of the season when they're played at Ford Field. And this was no exception. We saw these two teams play earlier in the season. It was a Thursday night game in Green Bay. The Packers had a ton of injuries. They had still not figured out their offense. And you may argue they still haven't. But I think the Packers are in a much different spot. And the Lions have improved a ton, which is why we've seen this point spread move up 5.5 points. What I would say from this game, from a betting perspective, if you don't want to get involved with the total at 47, Jordan Love passing attempts is priced right around 32.5. I don't see a situation where the Packers get out and are leading in this game comfortably. I think the Packers are going to be playing from behind. I think Detroit is probably a decent look on the side, but you're going to get Love throwing a lot. And he's had a couple games recently where he's gone into the 40s as this offense kind of changes and evolves. And if you take Jones out of the backfield, you're not going to get a ton of passes or a ton of rushing attempts for Dillon either way. It's just going to be the Packers throwing a ton. And so whether you want to approach that from a pregame side and look at that 32.5, or you want to wait till late first quarter just to sort of confirm that the Lions have the lead, they're building on it, you're going to see Love throwing a lot. And so that's something that I would sort of circle and put in the back of your mind if you're looking at this. I see very little chance that the Packers are going to get out, get a lead, and then lean on the run game. I think it really plays out one way, and it's going to be the Packers playing catch up, trying to keep pace with the Lions, who are going to get really whatever they want offensively. Run game, they're going to have injury advantages against the middle of the Packers defense. Passing game, they're going to be able to have some shots too, as they did within that first matchup. It's just a tough matchup for the Packers defensively. So I would circle that for sure. I know everybody's going to have the Lions in a teaser. I'm not going to try to talk you out of that, but I do think that we see the Packers trailing, and I think you're going to see Love throwing the ball a ton as well. So that's something that I would circle as you're looking through this as well. Catching up with a couple questions. Kurt says, thoughts on Lions for a survivor pick? If you have that, if you're in the Circa contest where it's the short week and you have to pick between these 4 games, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people who have saved the Cowboys to this point to use in that spot. So maybe you get kind of the second most popular look. I don't know how many people are still going to have Miami left. I'm not looking at like the charts on who has what left proportionally. But if you are in that shorter week, I think the Lions make a lot of sense overall when you're looking at them. James says Lions -4 for the first half. Could certainly see that coming through as well. Gerard Morris says, you live in Seahawk country. Yes, as a Jets fan, it's odd, but there's a lot of Seahawks gear. I was debating going to the game tomorrow against the 49ers. That was kind of one I had circled. It's about a 2-hour and a bit drive for me, but I don't think I'm going to make the trip down there. But yes, in Seahawk country, but Jets fan through and through. Joe Lupo says, need you back in the States for another John's on Bleecker pizza run, Adam. For those of you who don't know, the Simple Handicap podcast, we had a meetup, and everybody who was able to that listened to the podcast met in New York, and we did John's on Bleecker after we did McSorley's. So for those of you who live in the area, you know what goes down at McSorley's. That place was an absolute blast. And there was about 25 people. Some took the train in from Philly. It was a fun meetup of podcast listeners. And we had a lot of light and dark at McSorley's. And then we made our way over to John's on Bleecker, got into a few pizzas, and someone ordered the meatballs that were just deadly. And so that was fun. But yeah, we were going to do another one but then the whole COVID pandemic shut everything down plan-wise from that. But there was plans for the Simple Handicap Meetup number 2, and there was plans for the Simple Handicap Ryder Cup, where it was going to be podcast listeners 8 and 8 on 2 different teams, and then there'd be 2 captains that we would have. So that's still in the works too. We'll try to get something going maybe this year. But yes, I completely agree with that there needs to be another one of those meetups as well. Kel says, curious about the lobster flags in the background. I'm a massive golf guy. Cabot is the #1 course in Canada. It's the same as Bandon Dunes. And so I made the journey. It's about a 6-hour flight and then a 3-hour drive. I did it with a friend this summer. And so those are 2 flags from the course. I'm trying to collect all the flags from top courses that I play. So Chambers Bay is on the list. I really want to do Paso Tiempo in California and Alistair McKenzie course. And then I also want to get into the Bandon trip, which is lingering for maybe this summer as well. And so trying to sort of get flags from all the top courses I play is I like golf more than anything else. So that's where the 2 Cabot flags come from. And then there's a golf print above it as well from a YouTube channel that I follow too. So trying to build out the office, but there'll be more flags accumulating as we play through a couple of different courses. But that's where those flags come from as well. Let's get into the Commanders on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. Dallas, an 11-point favorite, -115 at Chris. Circa finally took the leap here with this, jumped up to 12.5. There's 12.5 over at Buckeye. DK went to 12 too. So we finally saw it kind of break through today. And this is a price that we see at every single Thanksgiving, right? The Cowboys are the popular side. It's the middle play. If you want to bet the underdog, you're waiting till the last minute. Cowboys are going to get bet up. That's how it goes. And so this is probably going to continue to creep up a little bit further. And something that I would say from the Commanders side to watch for, I don't know if anyone has been following it in the last 30 minutes. If practice reports came out, we're kind of in that window where these East Coast teams would be reporting. But Emmanuel Forbes within that secondary, he was banged up and injured. And so I will be curious to see if this really bad Commander secondary is going to be down another starter. I don't think it matters a lot to the point spread or total necessarily, but this is a Commanders defense that just got tore up by Tommy DeVito. I mean, they've struggled defending anybody all season long, and where that's a problem is the Cowboys now, their pass rate over expectation is right at the top of the league. They're throwing it a ton. It's been an offensive shift where they're letting Dak air it out. Obviously, that's a bad matchup for the Commanders. Where I kind of start to see this going awry is we're now, as we mentioned at the top and high low, the Cowboys 4th in market ratings. This is the absolute top for the Cowboys. Everybody's looking at Dallas as a team that beat up a lot of bad teams, have covered some big numbers. But if you're trying to bet Dallas in this game, especially now at like the 12.5s that we're seeing, Heritage just got bet as well and got pushed up a little bit more. You are laying a premium of a premium of a premium to back the Cowboys in this spot, which is just not something that I would want to do. I would be much more comfortable waiting and getting the Commanders at possibly even a 13 now, right before kickoff on Thursday afternoon as you're sitting at home on the couch with friends and family. I would much rather have the Commanders in this game than I would be laying the number with the Cowboys. What I like about the Commanders in this spot potentially is that you're going to have Sam Howell, who's willing to throw it a ton. You don't have just like a dead offense behind it. Like you're thinking last week with the Cowboys, right? They go and they play the Panthers. Carolina wasn't coming back once they got down. You're not getting that from Carolina. You are going to potentially get that from Washington, who have shown that they can play teams like the Eagles within the division quite tough. And so within this first matchup, I just much rather have the Commanders. Let's see how far this point spread pushes out. Again, you don't have to rush to do it, but you can definitely look at Washington. Again, similar to Green Bay, it's not a spot where I see Washington getting out and having a lead and like controlling the game. I think it's inevitably going to be the Cowboys leading. You're going to see the Commanders playing from behind and catching up. And so that leads itself to Sam Howell passing attempts as well, because of Washington, when they're trailing, they just throw the run game out the window and they start firing. Really, the conservative and tight play calling has come into few instances that Washington has had a lead. When they're trailing and playing from behind, it's wide open. And so the Cowboys are going to concede that. and the offensive line changes for the Commanders have allowed Howell to get the ball out of his hand a lot quickly. That sack rate has come down a lot. So again, similar to Love, whether you want to do it pregame or you want to do it in play once you confirm the Cowboys have a lead, you can kind of sit on that too. From the Cowboys side, double-digit favorite at home, conducive to tight end scoring. You have Jerry Jones on radio talking about how he loves to see the ball go to tight ends. Ferguson is becoming really popular on a weekly basis, but I still think it's a spot where he's probably pretty ripe to find the opportunity to score a touchdown. So if you're looking at those anytime scores, he's going to be a popular look as well, for sure, as those guys get a lot of attention, certainly in these spots, and the Cowboys really kind of force those throws to him. So if looking at this, I would much rather have the Commanders late, right before kickoff, and see how big that number gets to just go against the Cowboys at the absolute peak of the market. And then you could look at Howell attempts. You could look at Ferguson numbers as well. Murray says Washington has been excellent on the road, terrible at home. I don't know if that's necessarily like a FedEx Field. Is it still called FedEx, or is it Landover? Whatever it is. I don't know if it's a home away thing. I think it's more of a price thing. Like the Commanders is a 9 or 10 point favorite or a 6 point favorite early in the season against Arizona. It's a much different role. They're just much better suited for these games on the road where they're typically bigger underdogs, because again, that offense just is live late. And so that stands out a little bit too. Morgan says, tries Succession down in South Carolina. Place is amazing. I really want to do Citrus Farms in Florida. I've been to South Carolina once. I didn't golf, but Charleston's one of my favorite cities ever. And so a South Carolina trip is absolutely in the cards. But there's a couple courses down South Carolina and Florida that I really want to get into. But good call out on that one specifically. B-Dub says, have you played Kings Links locally? Fun course, best in tough greens. I did like 3 years ago. I used to live in Vancouver downtown, and I had friends come in. We played in like 80-kilometer winds off the coast. And so for those, it was like 45 miles, whatever it is on the conversion, like just insane winds. And it was wet and it was muddy. Hole 2 slipped down a hill on the lip of the bunker. Whole back was just covered in mud for the rest of the round. It was a complete nightmare. It was just soaking wet, blistering winds. Nobody was even close to breaking 90. It was just a complete disaster. Loved every minute of it with friends. That was a really fun round that I remember for a long time. So really like Kings Links, but doing a lot of work with a pro over at Morgan Creek now if you're local or in the area. That's kind of the closest course to me as well. Matt St. Marie says 40 burger for Dallas coming. Could be possible. James Davis, Commanders are going to throw 50 plus. It could absolutely turn out that way, which is why I think those Howell props from the attempt side can certainly look. Bennett says Commanders O-line still improving. I remember they were trending up. So they made a switch, and I'm going to butcher what it was. I believe it was the left guard and left tackle switched. It was 3 or 4 weeks ago when we've seen this whole team kind of turn around. And especially that time to throw for Howell's dropped down. I can't remember what the specific change was, but the offense looks night and day for how it was versus the start of the year where he was just helpless in the pocket. So that changes too. Not running to it's not a bad look, but honestly, I'm not a good total or team total guy, so I don't have a strong opinion on that. But certainly you think about the Commanders trailing, the way they throw, their propensity to increase the aggression, I could see it for sure. 49ers on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. As we're on the stream, the 49ers just got bet. Is now out to 7 -20 at circa 7 -15. I've been streaming here for 23 minutes. I don't know if there was some lock or Geno announcement. I feel the phone whistling as well. So I don't know if there was injury news that came through as I hear the injury service beeping on my phone. I'm looking now. I don't see it. So it could have just legitimately been a bet on the 49ers that pushed this out a little bit further. This, to me, again, similar to the Cowboys, I can't help but notice, like, if we bring back the market ratings and we look at these, San Francisco back to their peak at number 1 within the ratings. Seattle kind of rightfully priced now down at 11. You're looking at the difference between the two right around 7 points. And so you're really not giving Seattle any sort of bump overall for this game from their home field on the short week whatsoever. It's essentially being priced now at 7 minus 20 as the ratings would have it on a neutral. And you're just looking at this as a similar spot to the Commanders and Cowboys, where it's like, can you really comfortably lay San Francisco at this price with them at the absolute peak? And so for me, the only way I could look here is Seattle getting the points at home. But with it being the Thanksgiving game, you just kind of wait it out and see. There's no harm in waiting, because these teams, season after season, it's such a basic thing, but these favorites in these spots just get bet out. And so I think we're going to see the Niners maybe take a little bit more. There was certainly an appetite for Seattle from somebody yesterday on the pro side that brought it down to 6.5. The big question, obviously, is Geno versus Drew Lock. So he came back in, Geno did, on the final drive last week, tried to lead the comeback. They settled for the 55-yard field goal and thought that that was the right decision, which backfired. And so it's a matter of how healthy is he versus is he really going to be limited? And so the question is a 70% Geno Smith better than 100% Drew Lock? And I think what we saw from Lock in the limited time last week probably indicates that, yes, it probably is going to be better. You think about where Geno really struggles and has looked poor this season. It's against defenses that play a ton of man coverage. The Cleveland Browns game, a perfect example. The Ravens, who adjusted, a perfect example. San Francisco was playing more man than they typically do, and that came pre-bye. And what changed was Kyle Shanahan wasn't happy about it, because you heard Fred Warner, you heard Bosa, both in press conferences saying, like, we don't like how this defense is going. We don't want to be doing this. And so they go out and they get Chase Young to bolster the front four pass rush. And Kyle Shanahan came in, and now he's kind of meddling within the defense, saying, like, we have to go back to what we used to do and do well. And so we saw in the game since the bye, a lot less man, a lot less blitzing. And so from a just scheme and matchup perspective, this should fit what Geno excels at better. The problem is it's just a really good defense that he is going out and facing, which, if less than 100%, is problematic. And so if Drew Lock gets put into this scenario, I think it's death for Seattle. But if it is Geno at less than 100%, I think that he stands out. From a prop look, anytime San Francisco matches up with Seattle, I have a lot of intrigue in looking at George Kittle. I think back to the Thursday night game last season, was on his overs. He had the big catch. That matchup is always ripe for him to take advantage. From the Seahawks side, Kenneth Walker is trending towards missing. Zach Charbonnet is going to get more attention. If the Seahawks are trailing, you can look at his receiving yards over. It's not a great matchup. You may want to look at completions, but out of the backfield, when Seattle is trailing, his targets and his routes go through the roof as that passing down back. And so that would be something that you could absolutely look at and sit as you're looking for the Thursday night games. Gerard says Walker is out. That, I don't know if it's been 100% official, but I believe it might be. So that certainly stands out as you look at the backup running back now in the pass catching role. That certainly matters. Matt St. Marie says, Rappaport said, optimistic Geno is a go. That's the latest I heard as well, and that came 20 minutes ago. James says McCaffrey should feast. Yes, he should. You're also looking at, Connor says, Geno more hurt than being led on, which is interesting too. There hasn't been a lot said about it. And Pete's usually good at kind of disguising some of the injury stuff on his side too. So that certainly stands out. So just to wrap up Thanksgiving quickly, Packers-Lions over. I think we get a good amount of points because it is another Detroit home game, and these are really opening up. I think Detroit's going to lead. I think you could look at Love passing attempts. Washington-Dallas. I think Dallas is at the peak. Would look towards Washington late. Maybe they end up getting a 13. I think Howell's going to throw it a ton as well. And then Jones and others have circled Ferguson within this game, wanting to see tight ends get more production. San Francisco, Seattle, kind of stuck with the QB news, but this is, again, similar to Dallas, San Francisco being priced at a premium. Wait to see what happens with the QB side. Looking at Charbonnet for the Seahawks, and then Kittle for San Francisco. One more game we have on the Thanksgiving slate, Miami, New York on Friday. Dolphins now a 10-point favorite across the board, kind of a soft 10. We're seeing 10 even money at Buckeye. We're seeing 10 minus 08 at DK, 06 at Heritage. 8.03 at Chris. So that's kind of trending down. Circa, as we were on the stream, went to 9 for the Dolphins. Total 41. We're seeing under -10 at Pinnacle, under -15 at Chris. I think this, to me, is a dead look to the over at 41. I think we see points here. I don't agree with the Dolphins game being lined at 41. The lowest total we've seen from Miami all season was last week against the Raiders. That closed 44. We're now 3 points less than that. I think that's much too low. Even in that game against the Raiders, some misleading kind of numbers coming out of that. The Dolphins didn't punt until the fourth quarter. They were consistently on the field moving the ball. They had turnovers. They had red zone stalls. It's just kind of a weird game for the Dolphins out of the bye that not many people expected, including myself. On the other hand, the Raiders taking chances, similar issues as they got close to the end zone, just couldn't get the ball across the goal line. The Jets certainly have struggled with those issues all season. 1 touchdown drive in the last 4 games. They haven't converted a 3rd and 8 or longer in what seems like an eternity. Just 3 of those all season long, which is pretty crazy. But I can't look at a Dolphins game with a total of 41 and not look to the over. I think the Jets offense, and this was a good question from Hitman, better, lots of people will know in the space. He texted me this morning at 4:45 a.m. and he's like, what's the case for Tim Boyle to do something in this game? And I thought about it with one eye open, looking at the phone in bed. And I'm like, well, the only case that can really be made that he does something is he and Hackett and Rodgers have familiarity. So Boyle was with the Packers in 2019 and 2020 on the bench, working with Hackett, working with Rodgers. And there is some familiarity. And so I look at the Jets offense. I mean, how much worse can it get than what Zach Wilson was producing? It would be impressive if Tim Boyle came out and was significantly worse. It would be incredible if Tim Boyle came out and matched how much this total has dropped off. Remember, this was 42.5, 43 when Zach Wilson was still the starter. Tim Boyle was announced in. It dropped all the way to 40. Like that's giving Zach Wilson a lot of credit. And so if Tim Boyle is at the same level as Wilson, we know that this total deserves to be a little bit higher, but I think there's maybe a little bit of a case to be made that Boyle comes in, he has familiarity. It's not this like rookie that has no experience, that hasn't been around. He's been with this offensive system per se for 2 years in the past. He's not a nobody. He's been put into standalone Thanksgiving spots before as well. I think he comes out and does something, or at least gives Wilson a few extra targets. Garrett Wilson, that is, who's able to do something, or maybe Breece Hall out of the backfield. He targets, like there's potential for the Jets to get to 14 or 17 points. And so I don't know how you can be worse than Zach Wilson. And the market is saying that Boyle is a lot worse than that. And like James says, it can't be worse. It really can't. If it is, it'll be impressive, and I'll pay for it, and I'll be fine with that. But I think it's been a drop off too. Gerard says nobody can cover Tyreek. An interesting thing about the Jets defense, right, is we've heard for weeks they're turning on the offense. The locker room's uncertain. Jeff Ulbrich has been brilliant as the DC, keeping that defense playing together and engaged. But we saw against the Bills, like, you can only do this for so long without getting support from the other side. You kind of see cracks starting to begin within this Jets defense. The season slowly slipping away. You're just not going to get that 100% effort, as great of a defensive coordinator as he is, every single week when you're getting blown out. And I mean, we're looking at the Dolphins now a 10-point favorite. They're going to have a lead. I don't think this is an Eagles game repeat. I think this is Miami, bit frustrated off of their offensive output or lack thereof against the Raiders, coming in and taking advantage of a Jets team that defensively has just been performing so far above expectation, hanging on for dear life. And now that it's dying out, and you feel it when you're watching it. And so I think this game plays over. I like the total. I think we get into the high 40s within this one. So if you're looking at 41, that can absolutely be a look to the over. Jason says Jets fans should pray Boyle twists an ankle and Simeon comes in. At least he has more experience. I'm not rooting for injury for anybody, but that's an interesting comment. I don't know. Boy, like, they signed Simeon and they're like making him into the guy that was going to take over. And so it is an interesting switch, but I think it shows that they trust the familiarity Boyle has with this offensive system more than what they have from Simeon. But Simeon is going to be listed as the backup. James says he will release the ball quicker than Wilson. That's certainly possible. Boyle not taking sacks on the border of field goal range would be huge for the total. Wilson kills totals taking sacks in field goal territory. You see the drive just inching along, and then there's that back-breaking play. I know exactly what you're talking about within that. So this game over 41 would be the look. Let's get to Sunday. Jags on the road at the Houston Texans. We're looking at a market high of 2 on the Jags at circa 1.5 for Jacksonville everywhere else across the board. Total in this game, 48.5, bet up from the opener of 45.5, a 3-point move to the over within this game. What I can say about this is you have conflicting viewpoints on the Jags, specifically towards the total. So last week, there were injury rumors going around the sharp betting space that Trevor Lawrence had hurt his knee in practice. And that is why Doug Peterson on Friday took the reversal on his stance and went out of his way to report that Lawrence was hurt and dealing with a knee injury. And so what that led to was a lot of confusion on how to bet the Jags and what that total was going to do a week ago against the Tennessee Titans. There was money that came in late on Saturday with Lawrence on some of the unders. On Tennessee took a bet, right? There was kind of that rumor swirling. But then there was kind of this counter argument to the rumor that was Peterson coming out on Friday to report Lawrence had the injury because of what we saw happen Thursday night, where Burrow was allegedly misreported and the Jags didn't want to incur any possible penalty. And it was kind of like Peterson covering for himself and the team. So that was the counter argument. I think a lot of that has now been put to bed because we saw 5 different designed runs for Trevor Lawrence in that game where the Jags had the lead. Once Jacksonville got into the red zone, they were willing to run Trevor Lawrence and scheming up plays for him to run. If I put myself in a coaching perspective, if I knew my quarterback was injured and he got hurt on Wednesday at practice and we're playing in a game on Sunday, I'm not running him and scheming up runs for him multiple times within the red zone where you know he doesn't have the option of getting down and getting out of bounds, right? You're playing for a touchdown at that point. You know he's going to get hit. It's conducive to contact. And so I'm not buying into those rumors. There was an article published, and I don't want to say the Score published it. I think it was published somewhere else, and the Score just ran with it, about how the Jags have not been able to open up their offense because Lawrence was dealing with the injury. To me, that article is more interesting to think about the Jags going forward than some of the rumors about him actively being hurt. I think there is a lot of truth to that because we have to now go back almost a month and a half to when the injury happened at the end of the game before the Saints game. And you think about this, right? They had the weird travel schedule where they were kind of managing players' rest times. Then you have Lawrence get hurt. Then you go into the short week and you have the bye. The Jags had one game in like a 3.5 week span with how the schedule was kind of laid out. And we haven't seen them playing in a lot of games where Lawrence, first of all, has sort of had time to get away from that injury. But we've kind of see them in like this lull rating wise and offensive production wise for a long time. And so now if Lawrence is starting to get healthy and the Jags are trying to open up the offense and it's trending towards what the Jags want to be, I think Jacksonville are going to be playing in games that have a lot of scoring in them. Now we're seeing this adjusted up mostly because of Houston. I'll get to that in a second. But one other thing I want to say about Jacksonville is from the film perspective and a lot of sources that I look at and I follow, about 3 to 4 weeks ago, when there was a back and forth between Ridley and Kirk within the prop markets, there was a big piece done on how Calvin Ridley was being put into the number 1 outside wide receiver route tree. And that was causing his production to fall off. He had a lot of drops, just never looked comfortable because Ridley throughout his career has excelled as the number 2 route runner. Last week was the first real shift we've seen with Jacksonville to kind of try correct that and put Ridley in more advantageous situations. He ran a lot more routes out of the slot and they were moving him around a lot. And turns out he had a very big game against Tennessee. Now with Zay Jones back and you have Christian Kirk on the other side, now Ridley becomes the guy that you can see the Jags actively scheming around. And now that he's getting more comfortable within the routes that he's more efficient running and producing from, he becomes a very interesting look within this offense as a whole that could really open things up. And against this Texans team that plays a ton of zone, you're probably going to look at him getting a lot more attention because, as we know, Christian Kirk is the guy that gets a lot of attention when the Jags play man. The splits of Kirk versus zone and man are night and day. And so Ridley stands out as that wide receiver. And so going on a long little tangent here, but that's kind of how I look at the Jags offense. And I think you start having to look at Ridley on a weekly basis, just like we did in the start of the season when all these guys were on the field and Lawrence was healthy and they were using him in the right ways. And so that's something that I would look at within this spot. On the other side, you have the Houston Texans, who offensively have really changed the last couple of weeks. Stroud went from about 3 weeks ago at the podium saying he wanted to throw more. He wanted more attempts. He wanted to be able to throw the ball downfield. Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, wanted the Texans to run a lot. Slowick and DeMeco Ryans both kind of conceded. They say, okay, let's let Stroud fire it downfield. Let's let him do what he wants. And you've seen in the last couple of weeks, Stroud has exploded. The Texans offense has taken on a much different look. Last week against the Arizona Cardinals, Houston got into or further than the Arizona 30. Does that make sense? Into or further than. They got to the Arizona 30 or further on all but 2 drives all game. I had it on a side TV, and I'm watching, and every time I look and switch over, Houston's inside the 30 and threatening to score. It was like 3 hours. Houston was operating inside the Arizona 30. Somehow they ended up with 21 points. A lot of that was turnovers from Stroud. A lot of that was mistakes. But what I liked about Houston, and why I still think you can look at the Texans as an over team, is Stroud came out after the game, and he's like, I made the mistakes. It's not going to stop me from throwing. I still want those opportunities. I still want to keep pushing it downfield. Like, we got to keep on with this. And so, I mean, you can see why this total has been bet up. And I think that's what you're going to get from both of these teams. As I think Jacksonville's kind of like a little bit of an undercover over team. I think Houston's kind of becoming the most obvious over team within the league. And so, again, 2 sides, a long way of saying I don't have a pick on the side or a total in this game, but I do think that Ridley stuff is definitely interesting to look at here with Jacksonville. All right. Long one there, but that was hopefully a good breakdown that gives you something to think about. Buccaneers on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. We are seeing Indy a 2.5-point favorite now, up from -1. Total in this game is 43.5. If you see a 43.5 available at your sportsbook right now, click the over. I think this is a game that you can comfortably bet at better than 44. I'm seeing 43.5 at Chris. I'm seeing 43.5 at Pinnacle. I'm seeing 43.5 at DK. I'm seeing 43.5 at FanDuel. That should cover like 90% of people watching this stream. Couple things at play here. First of all, Buccaneers offense. You heard me rant for weeks here on the podcast about how Dave Canales running on first down, running on second down, just pounding guys into the back of the line of scrimmage, right? He's still doing that. The rates have dropped off. It's cooled down. He's really letting Baker Mayfield throw. And Mayfield's not just having success on third down anymore. It's stretching out quite a bit. Last week against San Francisco, a very good defense. Watching the stream, think about where's San Francisco within the league sort of rating-wise. You probably have them at the top. Tampa Bay quietly had a 51% offensive success rate, right? Massive against a really good defense. That's what happens when you're letting Baker Mayfield throw to Mike Evans, throw to Chris Godwin, right? You can see that. Matched up against the Indianapolis Colts, I mean, Mayfield's going to have all the success that he wants. This is a really bad secondary, and you start to wonder if there's a bit of a fracture within the defensive locker room. They cut Shaq Leonard yesterday. Let him go. He's widely regarded as one of the best linebackers in the league. I know he's getting old, and I know that you have speed and Zaire Franklin, who's leading the league in tackles along with Leonard, and it's kind of changing how many DBs you want to have on the field, giving everyone time. But boy, you cut the defensive leader within that locker room for a defense that's struggling as is. That's quite a change. So I think Mayfield and company have a big game passing. And if Canales wants to bash Rachaad White into the back of the offensive line for 3 to 4 yards a carry, might look a little bit better because the Colts struggle so much against the run too. You have these great linebackers, but they're doing their job making that tackle. You're not going to have big runs against the Colts per se, but you're going to be able to move it chunks at a time. That's probably more effective than what the Buccaneers have done. I also think the Colts defense a little bit shaded towards the under than they should be because, I mean, it's been bad, but then you look the last 2 weeks and you're like, hey, they had 3 picks against the Panthers. Hey, they really shut down the Pats. That's Bryce Young and that's Mac Jones, right? Now it's a much different set. You don't have receivers on Carolina. You don't have receivers on New England. Now it's Mike Evans. Now it's Chris Godwin. Number ones have just had massive games against this Colts defense. So I think Tampa can move it. On the other side, getting into an over with Gardner Minshew is never great. However, this is a Buccaneers defense that Shane Steichen is more than capable of scheming up the right game plan. What is the right game plan? Throw as much as you possibly can. And that is now sort of increased in importance because you have Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis trending to miss this game within the secondary, and you have Levante David, the best cover linebacker, trending to miss this game as well. So all of a sudden, you take 3 pieces out of the Buccaneers' secondary and pass defense, and you have this just elite run-stopping unit up front, and it's a secondary that teams have been able to throw on. And so I think Steichen is more than capable of seeing that, identifying that, and letting Minshew try to attack this. And so I think both things with that matchup set up pretty well for a game where you're going to see points scored within this one. So 43.5. Let's get to the over in this one. Somebody was asking about teaser legs. I think the Buccaneers are live in a teaser as well. I think everybody's going to have Detroit as a leg. You can look at Tampa Bay as a leg within this as well. Let's look at some of the questions here and catch up. James says, not sure why the Colts are favored by 2.5 bucks. Might be my favorite teaser leg of the week. Hey, you said it for me. There we go. Gerard says, come on. I'm not going to read that. You guys get me with some every now and then, but there we go. So good comment there. I know you probably did not intentionally mean to do that like Harry Peter did on one of the live streams a couple weeks ago, but there we are with Gerard dropping in some humor or potentially just illustrating his Thanksgiving plans. Nevertheless, here we go. Pats on the road at the New York Giants. Okay. I like New England in this game. However, when you bet it is to be determined. Here's why. We don't know who's starting at quarterback for certain for New England. Mac Jones was at the podium today taking care of the starting QB media requirements that are put on a team, but he is in no way confirmed as the starting quarterback for the Pats this week. If it is Mac Jones 3-20 or 3-15, I think that's a bet that you can be pretty comfortable making against the Giants team with Tommy DeVito that looked so much better than they actually are facing a Commanders defense that can't stop anybody. I think that it's crazy. We have gone from Pats -5 down to -3. However, if it ends up being Will Grier or Malik Cunningham as the starting QB for New England, and you get something different, we have seen all season when starting quarterbacks are ruled out. Look at Wilson versus Boyle this week. It's a really bad bottom-tier quarterback in every way. Zach Wilson hasn't scored in a month on a touchdown drive, aside from a screen pass to Breece Hall that went for 55 yards, right? It's as bad as it gets. But even with him being ruled out, we're still seeing that point spread move from 7 to 10, right? And so all of these really bad quarterbacks are getting downgraded a ton. Cleveland last week on the stream, we said we like the Browns. DTR is going to be bad, but like we moved 5 points off of this. Like, what are we doing? I think the Pats are going to, if they start Grier or Cunningham, see their price come down. If you gave me the option between Pats -2 or 2.5 with Grier or Cunningham versus 3-20 with Jones or Zappi, I would prefer the former in that. I would rather have the third or fourth stringer at less than a field goal than I would Pats here with the starter Mac Jones or the backup Zappi at 3-20. That's how I would look at it. And so I'm going to leave it to you guys to decide if you want to tail that when you get in. I don't know the answer. You may find out the answer very quickly as you're following the week. But to me, like, this price has been adjusted way too far. And then you just have the factor of Belichick off another embarrassing loss in Germany, where, by the way, the Pats were outgaining and comfortably beating the Colts with Gardner Minshew, a quarterback that people love. You now have Tommy DeVito coming in and matching up against Bill Belichick, who gets some guys back on defense this week. Man, I don't want to bet on the Giants here at all. I would much rather have the Pats. It's just when do you get the QB announcement, and what is that going to look like? So to me, it's you got to play New England in this spot. The timing of it is the tricky part. If I knew the answer, I could tell you. But either way, you should have a New England bet in your account this week for sure. Gerard says, doesn't Belichick have a crazy record against rookie QBs? It's incredibly one-sided. And as a Jets fan, it's had to live through it for 15 years. It's never good when you get the rookie. But this is a tough one altogether. Paul Enzo, this is an Iowa-esque total. Isn't it a little bit higher than an Iowa total? Yeah, but this is Pats or nothing for me for sure. Shout out to Laura's Coffee, as always, here in White Rock, British Columbia. Let's keep it going. Panthers on the road at the Titans. I don't have a lot here to contribute. Titans are 3.5-point favorites. Total in this game is 36.5. I thought early week there was a chance that Ryan Tannehill could come back and start, but all the media he has done this week is about being released from the team and him kind of dodging those questions. And so what I will say is Derrick Henry's in line to have a monster game. The Panthers cannot stop the run. Even if they get Henderson back, even if they get J.C. Horn back, like the Titans are going to do what they want within this game, and that's run the football. And Carolina does not have the pieces to go out and stop that. And so Tennessee is going to get a comfortable offensive game plan where Henry gets a ton of catches and runs and has a huge game and puts up a pretty ridiculous number. And he's going to be priced to the moon because of that. But on the other side, you have a Titans run defense that is terrific. And the weakness for Tennessee has been the secondary. So it's really a question of, can Bryce Young and these receivers do anything in what is very likely going to be them trying to come back? My hesitance within this, it does look incredibly one-sided. It does look very easy for Tennessee when you just look at it from a far view away. The Titans play obnoxiously slow-paced football. Like, they are so slow, and they have the capability of putting up these 8, 9, 10-minute drives that just absolutely suck the life out of the game. And when you're laying a number like this, that's not ideal. You don't want to be betting on the Titans to win and cover by margin because they just reduce possessions in games like crazy. And so you're laying more than a field goal. You need the multiple scores. You have to defend against a Panthers offense that's not good in any way, but you have a bad secondary. That's the weakness, which is what the Panthers would be targeting if coming back. It's just not a good situation to lay. But I think Henry has a monster game. Let's get to Survivor now, because everybody's going to be debating between the Pats and Titans for their Sunday pick. If you put me on the spot for this, we had the discussion internally because we had somebody ask us, and it made its way into the group chat. I said I would rather take the Patriots because I would rather have Tommy DeVito beat me than I would Bryce Young beat me if I was in it. And that's flawed logic, but I mean, you're looking at a slate that's full of 3-point favorites at the peak on Sunday. But I would rather bet on Belichick. I would rather bet against Tommy DeVito. I would rather bet on the Pats having a bounce back game than I would the Tennessee Titans kind of reducing the possessions in a game, trying to play low variance spots and relying on Henry running the football for the Titans to sort of hold out that lead. That's just my stance. We had someone else in the chat. I can put Travis on the spot for this, who's brilliant. He said he would rather take Tennessee. And so I know that doesn't help anyone within that, but you can kind of look at it too. I think if everyone's going to be stuck between these two teams for Sunday, I would only look at these two teams. I wouldn't go anywhere else unless somehow, obviously, if you have Kansas City still available, amazing. But if you're stuck between New England and Tennessee, I would go New England if I was stuck between the two all the way around. Gerard says Belichick is 24-8 versus rookies. FYI. There we go. That's what I would do there. Faduni says low total, take the dog. that sums it up perfectly, right? Like there's a clear path for Tennessee, but everything that they're going to do is slow down the game, reduce the variance, and keep the score low. So it's a pass for me on that one. Pittsburgh Steelers on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. Pittsburgh -1, total in this game 34. Here's what I can say. In the last 18 hours, 2 pros that I know have bet on the Pittsburgh Steelers. The name of the quarterback coach that was being promoted is slipping my mind. Someone else can remind me in the chat who is going to be calling plays for the Pittsburgh Steelers this week. He was at the podium today. And here is the reason why people are potentially optimistic about the Pittsburgh Steelers this week, laying the point. He's at the podium, and he essentially, along the lines, it's not verbatim, but said, like, I'm not dumb. I see Jaylen Warren. I see George Pickens. Both of them need more attention. We're going to get the ball to both of those guys. Like, he called out Jaylen Warren and George Pickens and is like, we need to get these two guys more attention and get the ball to them more. And so if you're looking at this game, and you're like, what if the Steelers frustrated and struggled all season long? And it's not getting the ball to playmakers, running Najee Harris into the back of the offensive line, and Pickett just forced to throw outside on these impossible plays to complete, right? The Steelers now, with Matt Canada fired and Mike Sullivan, thank you, Murray, thank you, Michael, with Mike Sullivan now in calling plays, he's at least saying something that is different than anything we have heard Matt Canada say all season long. There's also something to be said about a bit of emotional reset. Mike Tomlin, one of the best motivational driven coaches in the league, is going to get something out of a reset, right? Like he's in a similar way to what you saw the Raiders week 1, like very similar coaching styles, obviously much different pedigrees. I'm not trying to put Tomlin and Pierce in the same category, but Tomlin lives off motivation and leading guys within the locker room. If there's a change to be made, as the Steelers players have been hearing fire Matt Canada at Steelers games, Penguins fans have been chanting it, right? Everybody's wanted this guy out. Like he's been the problem. Now it's removed, and you're looking at it with a guy coming in, Mike Sullivan, even though he's never called plays in this one game spot, you can definitely see a path where things are going to be different. And everybody who's been wanting this to happen is at least having the guy in charge of calling plays now saying what you want to hear. And so that's when you look at it and you're like, okay, big uptick for Pittsburgh. You get kind of checked there. If you get more Pickens and more Warren, that's what everybody wants. On the other side, you have the Cincinnati Bengals in like a complete 180. You now have them living life without Joe Burrow, who suffered the injury to end the season. You have Jake Browning stepping in. The season's at this point kind of dead for Cincinnati after that loss to Baltimore, right? And so it's like you see why there's interest in Pittsburgh. I will say, if you listen to the podcast on Sunday, the first reaction show, I was looking at this without the Canada firing, without the changes and that whole angle priced in. And I'm like, I kind of like Cincinnati because I think going from 5.5 now to Steelers 1 on the road has gone too far. And I just want to fade Pittsburgh. I've now thrown all that out the window. And I want to bet on Pittsburgh in this at a pick 'em. But I probably will much more likely prefer to do what John is saying, where thoughts on the Steelers backfield moving forward with the new OC and the rise of Warren, right? Like I'd rather bet on Warren against the Bengals team that struggles to defend running back passes. They struggle to defend tight ends. Or I'd rather bet on Pickens, sort of a clear-cut number 1 wide receiver talent who's now being said that he is going to get more attention. That intrigues me more than anything within this game getting involved. And so that's what I'll say. 2 pros have backed Pittsburgh that I know in the last 18 hours. There's interest for me personally in the props. You can see that the way this is trending, it's a significant change. And I think in this one spot, you get a pretty good offensive effort from the Pittsburgh Steelers. Let's continue on as I hold back a sneeze here for the 3rd game in a row. New Orleans on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta a pick 'em across the board. As we've been doing the stream, Heritage, DK, Ace, a couple other books have seen money come in on Arizona. They've also seen that come in on I'm getting Atlanta and Arizona mixed up. Arizona is being bet as we're talking. Atlanta has not been bet. Holding steady still at pick'em. Total in this game is 42. Saints are going to be without Marshawn Lattimore, who's been having a phenomenal season on defense. monster loss for what the secondary does. The drop off from him to the rest of the second, he's been having just a phenomenal year. Huge loss for the defense. Saints are also going to be without Michael Thomas. Not as impactful relative to the offense as what the loss of Lattimore is going to be to the defense, but still a huge loss. We also have unclear circumstances around the quarterback, whether it's going to be Derek Carr, whether it's going to be Jameis Winston, we don't know. What we do know is the Saints' bye from an offensive perspective was kind of wasted because Carr has been in the protocol, so he's not been able to sort of actively been working. And I think that really reduces the value coming out of the bye for the Saints in a big way. And the Saints desperately needed that bye to fix things on offense. Communication issues have been running rampant. Route combinations have been an issue. There was a lot of offensive issues they needed to fix and just really weren't able to do that because of the injury to Carr, who not only has the concussion, but the AC joint injury as well. And so I really think that the Saints, although they're arguably getting a little bit of that bump because of this situation, I know it's negated a bit by Atlanta having the same things, but when we look at where kind of both of these teams were trending into the bye and what they are coming out, I think Atlanta gets a pretty big bump over the Saints because of the differentiating circumstances that benefited Atlanta from the injury side, right? Ritter was back starting last week with the Heineke injury, or back playing, leading the offense. Now he was sort of announced as the guy. He got to do the full work with Heineke hurt. That was the guy who started the year. That was how they're trending. The Saints now have to kind of on the fly switch between QBs. And so to me, Atlanta has the advantage within that. And I really think that defensive injury to Lattimore is really going to allow Atlanta to find some success throwing the football with Drake London back in the fold as well. And so I would look to Atlanta here to pick them. I know everybody's been watching these shows all season. You've heard me say Atlanta so much. We obviously have the preseason stuff tied to them as well. I just, these injuries to New Orleans are pretty crippling, and I think Atlanta comes out of it. Murray says Winston is good for 2 INTs. I mean, he's going to be throwing it more if he's the starter than Derek Carr. He's a much more willing passer. We know that, right? But it's just, you're watching it, like that decision making, that throw that he fired 65 yards cross field for an 8-yard touchdown. Like he's going to give you so much of that. It's a tough one, but I would look to Atlanta. That the way that the Saints bye was disrupted, I think is impactful. Let's keep it going. Rams on the road at the Cardinals. This was the game I was talking about being bet. The Cardinals were bet at Heritage. We're bet at PPH. We're bet at Ace. Just now, as that money's coming down, it's basically the exact same price now across the board with the Cardinals. A pick 'em. Total in this game is 44.5. Rams as a pick 'em or a dog are intriguing to me in this matchup. Somebody left a comment higher up. Kyren Williams was just confirmed as the starter. He was essentially confirmed yesterday as they released Darrell Henderson. The return of Kyren Williams for the Rams offense, I think the importance of it cannot be overstated. He was, first of all, giving them a reliable ground game that the Rams could use that LA has not had for the last month. He was also giving Matthew Stafford the outlet to avoid taking these massive hits. If you think back to like late September, there was questions of like, are you ever going to take Kyren Williams off the field because he's getting so much attention? And I remember betting his props. We were going over like 2.5 and 3.5 receptions, and he was getting like 10 targets a game early season, right? He was a massive part of what made this offense work, what made things work downfield to Puka Nacua, what was making things work to Tutu Atwell, right? It was a lot of it because of Williams giving Stafford this option. He hasn't had it now 5 or 6 weeks. Now you put Williams back. That's going to change the Rams offense quite a bit, which at times versus Seattle was really stalling out and looking quite stagnant. I think that's a big boost. Obviously, Cooper Kupp, if he's not out there, would be an impactful loss. He has a low ankle sprain. He avoided the high ankle sprain. He wanted to come back last week. He said he was able to play. He was held out. There's still uncertainty about what his status is going to look like too. But to me, this is a spot where the Rams offense, because of Williams coming back, and if they have Kupp, it's an added bonus, looks a lot better. Arizona has been bumped up quite a bit with the Murray return. And I'm kind of, I don't want to say indifferent to it, but I think maybe it's gone a little bit too far at this point. Like, I know he looks healthy. I know he looks great. And I know he looks a lot like the Murray that we know and we remember. However, like, you're on the road at Houston and you're mustering 17 points. You're just scraping by barely to get into the 20s against Atlanta at home to squeak by with that victory. It's not like Murray has come back and this offense has evolved into like this top unit, right? There's just it hasn't been that. And like ratings wise, they're right around league average now. They were near the bottom before he came back. It's been like an 11 spot jump for the Cardinals in the offensive ratings. And to me, that's just gone a little bit too far, which is driving this price. So I don't know. I know I've been on the Rams overrated side a lot. We had a money line here on the show last week. Now, to me, it's like the Cardinals are getting this too much of a bump within this too. So another good point that I missed, Jason, Kaiser White is out for Arizona. Every down linebacker, played a ton. You think about the Williams return for LA, no White on the other side. That's a massive loss to a defense that has not been good all season long either. So that's a key point to bring up for sure. Cleveland Browns on the road at the Denver Broncos. Denver back to a 1.5 point favorite. Total on this game is 34.5, shaded slightly to the over. Like Denver in this spot, surprising to people, probably not. I've been talking about how I think they're underrated quite a bit. Frustrating game against Minnesota as they get into the red zone 5 times, fail to score the touchdown on all but one. That was a game where Denver lived on the other side of plus field. And the only time that Minnesota was moving the football, I know it seemed like Minnesota was always doing it, but you go back and look at the box score, Dobbs finishes with 210 passing yards, rushing. Everything that he was doing was on third down and late downs, making it work. Denver conceded that long 3rd and 20. Like, it was Minnesota again for another week, just coming up with massive timely plays against that Broncos defense, which otherwise played quite well, especially later in the game where they were consistently getting stops. The Broncos offense was moving the football. They just couldn't get the ball in the end zone. So a bit of a misleading spot within that. The Browns squeak by Pittsburgh on a last-minute touchdown drive or field goal drive from DTR, which set it up with a couple big plays. There was not anything that you can be optimistic about with DTR in that offense for Cleveland moving forward. And this, to me, becomes a pretty daunting spot for him going on the road to start. When you think about what DTR has done so far this year, he got the win last week, obviously, but that week 4 game against Baltimore where he started, that was also in Cleveland too. And so now for me, him going on the road with an offense that's struggling to move the ball as is not going to get any better going into Denver and facing this Broncos defense. I know people are looking at this and saying, like, well, like, you can see Russell Wilson sitting in the pocket, patting the ball with this pass rush for the Browns, just absolutely destroying him, right? That's like a visual that you can have in your mind within this. I could say the same thing, if not more so, on the other side. And I think in this spot, you're getting better QB with Denver at home. You're getting arguably the better coach as well. And I think you're getting a defense that's very underrated in the Broncos, only laying 1.5 points right now at home against a rookie quarterback making his first start on the road. That's going to be enough for me to get me on the side of the Denver Broncos in this one, laying 1.5 points. Couple comments here. Jason says, total seems too low. Why does Cleveland D not play as good on the road, but Denver is conservative, tough to play? Not many thoughts on the total for me in this one. Wish I had more to offer there. Cleveland on the road playing better defensively. I'm guessing that's probably, or playing worse defensively. I think that's going to be opponent skewed. A lot of these home road splits, obviously there's truth to some of it on like individual performance, but a lot of it too is going to be kind of like schedule induced. So if we look at who Cleveland has played on the road, they played Baltimore on the road. They played Seattle on the road in a tough spot. They played the Colts on the road, which I think was the most surprising to anybody. But again, like going on the road to play at Seattle, very tough spot. Going on the road to play at Baltimore, very tough spot. Going on the road to play at Denver, very tough spot, right? Those are all tough spots for a defense to do much in general. So a lot of that's kind of dictated by schedule for sure. Bills on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. We are looking at Philadelphia, a 3-point favorite across the board with a total of 48.5. Eagles get away with the win and the comeback against Kansas City on Monday Night Football. A very fun game to watch. Now go back home to host the Buffalo Bills. Bills beat up on the New York Jets in the first game in the post-Ken Dorsey era with Joe Brady as the offensive coordinator. To me, this is a game that screams points. Here's why. Buffalo Bills, defensive injuries. They are rampant, to say the least. I'm just going to pull up the entirety of the depth chart at the moment. But what we are looking at for the Bills now is Taron Johnson dealing with an injury. Dane Jackson dealing with a bad injury. Cam Lewis dealing with an injury. Taylor Rapp dealing with an injury. Micah Hyde dealing with an injury. Those are all cornerbacks and safeties for the Bills defense. They don't have to mention Tre'Davious White, he's on IR. Don't have to mention Kyer Elam, he's on IR. Don't have to mention Matt Milano, he's on IR. Don't have to mention Daquan Jones, he's on IR. Mentioned them anyway. They're all on IR, right? This is a Bills defense that's beat up badly. And they're now facing an Eagles team, which I really think can sort of exploit them. A.J. Brown was shut down by the Chiefs. The Chiefs have been so good at erasing number ones from the game. We see A.J. Brown come back in a big way against this defense. Devonta Smith, he's now stepping back into the number 2 role after a case of the drops and dealing with some injury stuff in the middle part of the season, week 7, 8, 9. He's now back and making a big impact. And remember that teams can comfortably run on the Buffalo Bills. And so this is going to be a tough task for the Bills to stop anything up front too. So I think the Eagles' path to success here on offense is really, really clear. On the other side, you have a Bills offense that has been 2 different units all season long. There's the no-huddle, up-tempo version that Josh Allen wants to run with multiple wide receivers, and that has been very effective. You then have this version of the Bills offense that McDermott wants to run, which is multiple tight ends, focusing on the ground game, slowing things down, all doing that to protect his defense. You have both scenarios. One of those is incredibly, well, it plays into unders in a big way, to put it lightly. And so you look at the Buffalo Bills, right? And you look at the scores that they have produced. They're 3-8 to the under. And you look at the last 4 games, all of them have gone under. You look at the Giants game, that went under. You look at the Jags game, that went under. The Bills have only played 1 game over in the last, well, since week 5, so the last 8 weeks. That was against the New England Patriots. Now, if we think back to the Patriots game, sort of ask ourselves, like, what was going on with the New England game? Why did that game fly over the total? New England's a bad offense. What was going on within that game? Why did it get to 53 points? Well, here's the thing. The Bills were down 10 points at halftime. When the Bills have been trailing this season and dealing with a 7-point-plus deficit, we have seen this offense open up. And it operates at the optimal scenario where you get the Bills speeding up, where you get the Bills with multiple wide receivers, where you get Allen playing from behind using his legs. He's a much more willing runner. Everything opens up, right? And so if you're looking at this game and you're saying, okay, here's an Eagles offense that has a really clear path to success, they're probably going to be leading in this game. That's going to speed the Bills up. When you get the Bills speeding up, that pushes the other offense too. And so when you're looking at these Bills overs, which have been few and far between all season long, you're really looking for an offense on the other side that can push it. And this is most certainly one that can absolutely do so. The other spot where we've seen the Bills really trailing was that Bengals game. We had some crazy turnovers that kept that from going under, but that was playing out like a dead over for the first 2.5 quarters, essentially within that. And so what I also think kind of plays into this too, to kind of wrap this up, teams throw against the Philadelphia Eagles more than any other team in the NFL because of how good the Eagles are up front within their front 7. And so if you're kind of thinking not only is game state kind of going to fuel what the Bills are going to do, but you also have a matchup side of things that encourages teams to throw more against this Eagles defense. And so you kind of get the Bills speeding up either way. And I think that in turn is going to keep the Eagles offense pushing as well and exploiting those defensive injuries. So this is going to be a fun game. I think we see a lot of points. Tyler asks if I still like the over. I do. And I did on Follow the Money yesterday with Mitch and Paulie mention the over in this one as well. But I think you see a lot of points within this from a prop angle. Would look back at A.J. Brown. There's just so many injuries. Nobody on Buffalo is going to be able to match up straight up against him as well. So he's going to come back into it. That Chiefs defense, honestly, circle it. You look at the way that they eliminate number ones. I guess we can talk about it now as the Chiefs 9-point favorites on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. It's really incredible when you go back and look through the box scores and look at what number one wide receivers have done against Steve Spagnuolo and this Chiefs defense. I actually have these rattled off on notes because I just did the write-up on it for the RAS app on Thursday night. So Tyreek Hill, 68 yards. Cortland Sutton, 46 yards, 29 yards. Keenan Allen, 55 yards. Justin Jefferson, 28 yards. DJ Moore, 41 yards. Calvin Ridley, 32 yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 68 yards. What did A.J. Brown finish with? Like one catch for 10 yards, whatever it was? Like they just erase number ones. You think about Las Vegas, they have a very clear number one in Davante Adams. It's about as tough as a challenge as the Chiefs have faced all season long. But if this continues, I mean, A.J. Brown was looking like the offensive player of the year. He was a non-factor in that game on Monday night. And so I do think the Chiefs absolutely have what it takes to defend Davante Adams. It always stresses me out when you're trying to look at a guy like Davante Adams and betting him under. But there have been other scenarios this season where even with coaching staff supporting it, saying like, we need to get him more touches and more involved, Davante Adams has had some pretty low impact games against defenses that are much worse than what the Kansas City Chiefs have. And so I really think that the Chiefs on defense here match up pretty well. Now let's go back to the top. People were asking at the start of the show. I saw comments about the Chiefs. There was one that said specifically, Mike Stacks, how can anybody trust the Chiefs this week? You're betting on a team who plays one half of football. This team is broken. They had a bye week and couldn't fix their issue. Okay. There was another comment that was along the lines of the Chiefs being broken as well. I wish I could find it. Here we go. I am tempted to fade the Chiefs was a comment because they're too high. Okay, let's bring this all back and kind of give the Chiefs thoughts here. When I watch an offense like the Carolina Panthers, for instance, right? You're watching offenses play where any wide receiver that is targeted anywhere on the field immediately has a defender on his back, and every single throw is just like this most strenuous, difficult to achieve thing to like it's just a struggle all game long. Nobody's getting open, nobody's finding space, nothing is happening. When you watch the Chiefs, you don't see any of that. You see these standout, mind-numbingly bad drops where it's an open receiver with the ball hitting him right in the hands, right? This is not a quarterback issue. This is not, in my opinion, a wide receiver drops issue. And that's going to sound crazy because the Chiefs lead the league in drops. But I think that drops are something that are just very luck-based and very unfortunate, that stand out a lot in our minds, but it's something that can quite easily be fixed. The big issue that bad offenses have is not something that the Chiefs have. The Chiefs are not a bad offense. The Chiefs don't have necessarily a drop problem, and they certainly don't have a quarterback problem. They have a quarterback wide receiver communication problem. And I think that that is what is plaguing this Chiefs offense so badly. And there were multiple times in the game against Philadelphia where Mahomes was letting the ball go and it falls incomplete. And he is looking downfield at the receiver, not because the receiver dropped it, not because the receiver didn't make the catch, but because the receiver was not in the spot that he wanted him to be. And there was a really good clip from Dan Orlovsky yesterday on NFL Live on ESPN that broke down a couple of these situations. And that's what you're seeing week after week after week with the Kansas City Chiefs, is it's just Mahomes and these wide receivers. A lot of them are not on the same page. And what are really good throws that he is accommodating for are untimely drops that are making this sort of communication issue that he has with the wide receivers disguised as a drop problem and saying that these receivers can't catch footballs. We've now had 2 occurrences in the Detroit game week 1, as well as on Monday night against the Philadelphia Eagles, where not only did you have the surprise of the Chiefs losing and not being able to come back, we watched these Chiefs games and we're like, Kansas City is going to come back. They're going to figure it out. They always do. And then they don't. And you're like, what just happened? They didn't do it? How did that not happen? And so it's like this shock and this surprise. And then right away, you pull up your phone and you go on Twitter, and it's all clips of wide receivers dropping footballs, and Sky Moore is getting buried, and Kadarius Toney is getting buried. And right. And so it's like, oh, it's a drop problem. These are all the issues. And then it's the Chiefs leading the league in drops and this and that. But what seldom gets talked about is how some of these routes are just not being run in the right way. And to me, the blame with this goes on the wide receiver coach, who within Chiefs forums is now just getting absolutely buried because people are uncovering his past and saying, like, how did this guy end up getting promoted into this role? That's really becoming the big issue. And so to me, the Chiefs can and will fix all of this. And we're going to get to a point where the drops are kind of like an afterthought of something that happened earlier in the season. But it is entirely a communication issue that is happening with the Chiefs. That is the big problem at sort of like the crux of this. And so how did they end up fixing that? That's the big thing with the Chiefs. Now, with the second half scoring, that's really interesting too, because nobody mentioned this before the graphic was shown in the second half of the game against the Eagles, and the Warren Sharp tweets it out, and then all of a sudden it became like the thing that he found and everybody was going crazy about. And now all anyone can talk about is how the Chiefs are struggling within the second half. There was no mention of this before the Monday night game when that happened. And I do think that represents another issue, because to me, the most egregious thing that happened in the Chiefs game on Monday night was the punt decision on 4th and 4 from the Eagles 38 when they were up. I think 17-14 was the score at the time. That was the egregious issue that happened. But this is not unique to just that game. This is something in this like conservative play calling manner that Andy Reid has kind of showcased throughout the season. What I don't know is that is it like a lack of trust in wide receivers like I just talked about to make these plays in these spots? Is it Reid changing philosophy? Like, I don't know what the extent of that is, but we're seeing it a lot more. And to me, what was kind of really telling within all of this, to kind of wrap that game up, is it used to be unthinkable that you would blitz Patrick Mahomes. The entire defensive shift from how defenses are playing and why we are seeing this drop in totals league-wide is because of how defenses adjusted to defend specifically Patrick Mahomes, right? This cover two deep shell, keep everything in front. This switch the last 2.5 seasons was to defend Mahomes better. And that's why we're seeing these crazy low totals when all these offenses struggling. It was unthinkable to blitz Mahomes. And to put in perspective kind of the wide receiver issues that they're having, the Eagles, I think they had 9 different defensive snaps where they ran cover 0 and brought everybody. And we're like, we're fine. We'll play man outside. We don't think that you can make those passes. That would have never happened a season or two ago, ever. You would have never seen it. And I think it illustrates, like, the Eagles saw it. They're a great defensive front, but they're like, we can play with these wide receivers outside because we know that communication is not there with Mahomes. And these wide receivers are going to make the wrong decision adjusting their routes downfield. And by then, we're going to be able to get pressure on Mahomes because we're bringing extra guys. That would have never happened. Mahomes would have killed it. And that, to me, really illustrated kind of the issue with the Chiefs at the moment that they need to figure out. Because now, all of a sudden, we just saw a team defend Kansas City in a way that we haven't seen a team do so in a very long time. And so Kansas City has to sort out that wide receiver communication issue. The drops will sort themselves out. And I do not think in any way it's a quarterback or offensive coordinator situation. But if that communication sorts itself out, I think we're going to see Reid get more aggressive in his play calling. And that's going to sort of return to the level that we would expect. So that's what I would say about the Chiefs as a whole. And the good thing about Kansas City is we've seen them work through position group issues in the past. They have an incredibly easy schedule. I still think this is a team that can probably finish the season with 13 wins when you look at how easy their schedule plays out the rest of the way. And it begins with a very easy game here against the Raiders. Long sort of analysis that you can kind of keep in the back of your mind, but it's a long and uncomfortable way of saying, like, I don't see a lot here, side or total. Obviously, the Chiefs, if you see 8.5, are going to be a very popular teaser leg. I don't need to point that out, but that's a long one. 2 more games to go. Very long episode here, hour 24. We'll try to wrap this up in the next 7 or 8 numbers. If you have any questions in the chat before we send you off for Thanksgiving, please leave them in the chat below. Going a little longer because won't be doing the podcast tomorrow or Friday, so wanted to give everybody a few extra thoughts to think about as you go into the weekend. Ravens on the road at the LA Chargers. 47 is the total. Ravens 3.5-point favorites across the board. I think the Chargers are an intriguing underdog at home in a game that decides the season for them, also likely decides the career future for Brandon Staley. This is do or die for the Chargers. This is do or die for Staley. And they get a Ravens team coming in that has to start living life without their best offensive skill position player. Mark Andrews went down, to the chagrin of prop bettors, including myself, who were looking at what seemed to be a pretty easy over against the Bengals. Lose him on the first drive. He's going to miss the rest of the season. But now the Ravens have to figure out, okay, is this going to be an offense now that opens things up? You see Zay Flower running much more downfield routes, getting much more aggressive within the passing game. How are they going to adjust for that? Chargers do not have Joey Bosa. That's going to be a big blow to the defensive front. Probably negates some of the pass rushing capabilities that the Chargers are able to put on the field in a big way. Mack by himself, he's been great with Bosa out there, but certainly going to look a lot different. Now, this is Ravens. I know we've been talking about the Cowboys at their peak. I know we've been talking about the 49ers at their peak. When you're looking at the Baltimore Ravens, they're 5th within market ratings. Last week, they were 3rd, and they get out with the win and the cover, and it kind of shows how teams around them have adjusted up. To me, this Ravens team laying this number on the road against a Chargers team that continuously finds ways to find themselves in close games, it's too high for me to get to. And I'm saying this with a bet at the Chargers at 4, at 3.5. I'm like a little bit less excited, but I do think that the Chargers can keep this close. And this is a spot where I don't trust the Ravens offense needing to sort things out without Andrews going forward, because beyond what they had with Andrews, the run game has been fine. The offensive line has been terrific, but the passing game past Andrews has been a little bit uncertain now for a couple of weeks, and they have to figure out how they're going to utilize Zay Flowers. I think he's really been misused for the last couple of weeks. They have to sort that out. But to me, this is a game that really is going to be a one-possession spot. I think the Ravens are going to be a very popular side, but I like the Chargers here getting the points at home on Sunday Night Football. And there's not a lot more to it than that. It's just kind of that feeling you have when you look at it and you're like, it's going to be too high. Monday Night Football, Bears on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. The Bears have been getting bet as the podcast has gone on here for the last 90 minutes. It's been consistent Chicago money. We're now down to Minnesota 3 at home. This was as high as 4.5 earlier in the week. Now you're getting to the point where it's getting into the range of being priced fairly. I think the Bears are an underrated team from the market ratings perspective. I don't think that they're 30th. I certainly don't think that their defense is 30th. You look at what they've done against the run. They've been a top 12 unit the last month and a half. Defensively within the secondary, they're improving too. Again, they've faced a Lions offense that we are regarding as a top 10 unit within the league. Some people have the Lions offense as high as 5th, right? They were in Detroit, a stadium and environment that just produces points. And the Bears were on the field a ton, and they just completely got gassed by the end of it, plain and simple. And you saw the Lions with 2 big drives to come back. But that was a Chicago team that was comfortably in front of a very good Lions team for 3.5 quarters. And now the Bears go into Minnesota, and it's putting the Vikings in a much different situation. It's putting the Vikings in a much different role, laying the points. Like we're looking at this Minnesota Vikings team that was a 3-point dog on the road at Denver. They were a 3-point dog at home to the Saints. They were a 3.5-point dog on the road at Atlanta. And And like you look at where those teams are rating, we know Denver got the recent bump, but like those were below average teams ratings wise. If the argument here is that Chicago's underrated at 30th and you're putting them in the mid 20s and you're going Vikings from 3-point dogs against those teams to now 3+ point favorites at home, that's a big swing. We talked about the Vikings Broncos game. Vikings got away with a ton. It was a lot of 3rd and 4th down plays. It was a lot of 3rd and longs. It was a lot of scrambles that were undesigned where Dobbs got out and extended the play. It was the Broncos failing to score from inside the 10-yard line multiple times. The Vikings still end up losing that game. And again, like if the Bears defense is underrated, which I think it is, if the Vikings defense or offense is overrated, which I think it is, you have these two things matching up. There's value within that too. And now you have the price change for the Vikings going to the other side. That's something that I think you have to look at the underdog within this spot too. Good comment here from M. Hunter. Vikings much more run heavy with Dobbs. Bears much improved run D, big advantage. And that's really like the full extent of it. I certainly think that matters too. So it makes all the sense in the world to me that the Bears are getting bet within this spot. All right. Fun show. 90 minutes. Sets everyone up for Thanksgiving. Anyone have last second questions, please get them in. Got through a lot of games, left you guys with hopefully a lot of sides, totals, props to think about, sort of higher level thoughts on some of these teams as well. I think there's a lot that you guys can take away. If you're a Thursday or Friday spending time with the friends and family, you got some things to think about. I think in-play props this week are going to be a lot of fun to look at too. Especially with those Thursday games where you're going to get a lot of availability as they're all standalone games back to back to back. So you can look at different spots within that in play, especially with some of those passers and attempts based on how those games are playing out. You're going to get some good stuff on Sunday as well with some of those sides and totals that I think stand out quite a bit as well. Garrett asks, can you give us a futures market bet? Garrett, you ask every show. I gave you one good one. Last 2 weeks, I've let you down without giving you anything. This is the third week. Got to let you down. I don't have anything off the top of my head that stands out within that. The one thing that I was discussing was the Buffalo Bills and their playoff outlook. I don't know what the price on that was. It was like plus 165 last week. I think it was slightly lower. Mitch and Paulie got to this at the very end of our segment, but we had a big thing we wanted to talk about, and I missed it. But the way that the schedule plays out for the Bills, they have the Eagles and Chiefs coming up. I was making the case that there's a path for them to get to 10 wins, which we thought was going to be good enough. Paulie was countering, was saying they have 5 conference losses, potentially 6 with the Chiefs, which kills them in tiebreakers. But a lot of things last week broke their way to give them what I thought was better than plus 165 to make the playoffs. I don't know what the price is, so I don't want to advocate for anything now, but that was the look to sort of look and consider overall as well. Zach says, what are 2 of your highest conviction bets? I don't have anything necessarily higher or lower. I think that Black Friday over is the one that stands out the most to me. Bucks, Colts as well to that total would be something that jumps out as well to me. Ricky, do you see the Pats being able to win with margin, or is betting -3 just betting for a push? No, you have can go back to the Pats one. I think that is the side to look at. Would be comfortable doing that too. All right. Have a fantastic Thanksgiving weekend, everybody. Enjoy the time with family, friends, football. Hopefully you have a great couple days. I will be not doing the podcast tomorrow and Friday. First 2 days off from doing media since back in August. Just not a lot of people around to listen to it. Your morning routines are different. So I won't be on the Thursday or Friday morning pod. That will resume Sunday night with the Monday morning show, and we'll be back to catch you up with everything that happened here this week. But have a fantastic couple days. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you again for tuning into the show. Appreciate everything. And if you give a thumbs up and a like before you leave, helps me and the channel out a lot as well. And of course, if you have any questions between now and Sunday, down in the comments below. Thanks everybody for stopping by. Have a fantastic weekend. We'll chat to you Monday morning on the pod. We'll be back here on Wednesday next week, 9:15 a.m. Pacific time with another show.